Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty, are you going to share a PPT today? Mr. Priya?
Yes, sir. I'm going to share the PPT.
Great, great. All right, it's already 15 participants so far. Happy evening once again. In the last webinar, we discussed about the concept of systematic literature review. Today, we'll be discussing about the research gap identification and the model development. There are a lot of techniques which could be used for identifying the research gap, be it the limitations of the previous studies or the future directions given in the previous studies, or it could be based on the arguments which you like to place based on the findings reported in the previous study. So it's basically an art wherein you are able to know what was not done, why it was not done, and why do you propose to do it. So that art is going to be delivered by Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty today as part of today's webinar. With this note, I request you to commence the session.
Thank you, Sudhakar sir. Can you see the presentation, sir?
Yes, yes, three-way filing technique.
Yes. So yesterday we finished with the three-way filing technique. Today we are going to start with the reading of research articles, and as Sudhakar sir said that one of the most important is the research gap identification and conceptual model development. Well, frankly speaking, conceptual model development itself would be one particular week's webinar. So we need to discuss a lot on the week's webinar, next week's webinar. So maybe that we will keep it for some other time. However, I will give you a brief, like a trailer of what conceptual model development looks like, and what are we going to discuss in the upcoming webinars. So schedule will be posted in the group. So please be with us in the group. Do not leave the group because that is very much important for you to get the notifications. So we will take some time break, and after that we will return to you with the proceedings of the webinar, which is the other weeks. Okay, so we'll start with the reading of articles. Now this is something which is you can directly take and you can directly imply in your research. Now this is something that I have also understood after almost like 3-4 years into my research, and this is something that will help you in shaping not just your research paper rather than making you a fast reader. So there is something called as rapid reading or rapid course, but this is not something which is about rapid reading. Rather than that, this is something called as a superficial reading. Okay, so how do you do this superficial reading, and how do you, so basically every paper or every article is kind of a body. Okay, so that is why it is called as the body of the article. Now what is there in the body? So body has bones, body has your flesh, and body has your upper skin. So similar to that, every article has a body, and in this body your methodology and methods are basically your like framework or the structure or the fundamental bricks that constitute the whole article. And whatever you see apart from that are the flesh. Okay, so suppose introduction or figures or anything of that sort, sorry, introduction or discussion or findings, all these are basically your flesh of the article. And finally there comes the skin, which is the beautification of the article, which is done in terms of figures, and which is done in terms of figures, or especially statistical tech tools and technique that you have to see. Now I would give you a brief method of how you read an article quickly. Many a times many of my researcher friends ask me that sir, what is the best way to read an article quickly? Or suppose a person like me can read about 15 articles in a day. Now, reading 15 articles in a day will be an impossible task if you read one by line. So this is what I will suggest you, that this is how you can do the primary reading. Please note that this is only about primary reading. After the primary reading, you again have to go back to the three-way filing technique, in which you have to define which is your primary article. If it is a primary article, you have to then give it a thorough read. Okay. If it is a secondary or tertiary, you can give it a shallow read. So we will, without any delay, we will start with the reading of the articles. So wherever you see an article, you have to go to the abstract first. Okay. With, without seeing the article itself, if you read the abstract, after a certain point of time, when you have read almost around 200, 300 articles, you can notice that you don't have to read the whole article. You just can, it's like seeing a movie again and again. So it's like basically seeing a movie again and again. So if you see the Tamil dubbing, if you see the Telugu dubbing, it is going to be the same story. So abstract can be the abstract can be the way by which you can distinguish between which article resembles which article. Okay. So abstract of the article, you have to give a thorough read. Any article, when you are reading, please read the abstract thoroughly. Once you read the abstract thoroughly, you will find out that whether this article is a primary article or secondary article or tertiary article. Now, if it is a primary article or if it is a secondary article, you go to directly to the methods and methodology. Okay, so scan the methods, skip the introduction. Introduction you need not read, because introduction is the compilation of your literature review and your conclusion, right? Uh, I think somebody's mic is on. Sudhakar sir, can you please?
I'll mute. I'll mute. You can unmute and talk.
Sure.
Yeah, kindly unmute yourself and you can continue. Please unmute yourself. Mr. Priyank Krishna, I have muted all. Now you can unmute. You can unmute yourself.
Yes. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay. So without reading the introduction, you can directly go to the methodology. Even you don't have to read the review of literature. Okay. Why? Because review of literature is something which is, which is constituted of all the articles. So when you are reading an article and when you are reading a set of articles, you are basically reading the crux of the articles. So when you collect the crux of all articles, you basically read all the articles. So you do not need to read the review of literature. So you can skip the introduction part, give a shallow read, or maybe you can skip the review of literature also and directly go to the methods. Why methods? Because method, as I told you, is the bone of the study or fundamental brick of the study. So if you understood the method on methodology, you basically understood the whole structure. So you can then place the author in one of the domain. Okay, so suppose the author has used qualitative technique, in that suppose the author has used grounded theory, then you can put that paper in one of the domains in which of one of the domains of grounded theory research. Okay. Similarly, if the author has used PLSM, which is a partial least square method, then you can also put them into one of the groups. So with seeing, I mean, after the abstract, you can directly go to the methods and methodology. Once you have seen that, you can go to the focus on the figures. Now figures are the figures are nothing but the summary of all the results that the study actually focuses on. So without reading the discussion, or without reading the analysis part, you can directly focus on the figures. Okay. And after you have focused on the figure, you can then so discussion is something which is very important. So because discussion is the only part of your article in which there is a parallel discussion. So parallel discussion means the many of the authors in the discussion section says that what is the previous finding, what are the previous finding, and what are the findings of this research. So you can compare the findings of the results. note the findings of in the conclusion. Okay, so conclusion, in that you can have only one or two sentences. What are the generic, or what are the specific conclusions that the article talks about? And finally, file it away. So file it away means basically collect the, so you would have collected the referencing at that point of time. Then you can make an Excel sheet in the abstract, you can paste this. So while you are starting with the Excel sheet, you can paste the abstract in the first. Then you can go to the methods and methodology. Very briefly, you have to write the methods and methodology. In the figure section, you can write the key findings. Then in the discussion, you can you don't have to make a specific column for the discussion, but you have to make you have to keep a track of all the discussion, all the articles that have been discussed in the discussion sector, because discussion section gives you the previous findings of similar topics. Okay, finally, findings, one column you can make and you can file it away. So once you have filed it, you are done with one of the papers. So this is how it's like cutting a fish, or so it's like butchering a fish or butchering an animal. So you basically cut down the, you basically cut down the flesh, you basically take down the bones, you take out all the unnecessary part, and finally whatever you are done, I mean whatever you are left out is the crux, or is the required thing of the research. Then synthesizing the literature. Okay, now that you have a database of all the literature that you have given a shallow read, mind you, I am always saying that this is something which is a primary reading. If it is a this is something which you do in the initial stages of your research. But if you find that article as a primary article, and what are the primary articles? Basically the articles which has all your 3 keywords or 4 keywords, whatever your keywords are, then you have to give it a deep read, which is going into in depth. Finally, you synthesize the literature, and what do you do in that? Combining the elements of several sources to help you make a point. So basically, you must be in a position to distinguish that what are the different views that have that have emerged while you are reading all the literature. In that you can talk about methodology, in that you can talk about chronology, you can talk about the contradicting arguments. All these things should be in your mind. So combining several elements of several sources to help make your point. So as I told you yesterday, you have to become like a lawyer. Now that you have done the work of a personal investigator, you have to do the work of a lawyer now. So what does a lawyer do? Kind of uh, lawyer kind of arranges the argument in such a way that your argument looks the better. Okay, then describing how the sources converse with each other. So knowing the synthesis, knowing the linkages of one article with the other article is also one of the points that you have to get through with. So, and it's actually not that easy. While I'm saying this, it looks very easy, but uh, this will happen only when you have done deep read, and both shallow read and deep read of around 200 to 300 articles. Then you can link one article with the other article. Then organizing similar ideas together, so readers can understand how they overlap. So basically, as I told you, that most of the article tells the same things, only specific findings are only 2 lines or 3 lines. So the whole article tells almost replicates the same thing, but only 2 3 lines are the crux of the article. So you have to organize it in the similar way that you can say that such and such in the year such and such argued in favor of such and such in the year such and such, so that it shows that you are able to link the arguments with one with the other. Finally, synthesis helps the readers to see where to add your own ideas. Okay, so wherever you find that there is a gap, and that's what we are going to discuss in the next slide, that wherever you find that there is a gap that you can fill as a researcher, you will definitely go and fill that research through your findings, right? So this is how you basically synthesize the research. Then we will now we are directly going towards the research gap identification and conceptual model development. Obviously, conceptual development model we will not be able to discuss in detail. we will only highlight few of the main things which are conceptual models. Now, research gap. What is research gap? It is nothing but the problem that the researchers address in the research, and it is the gap that the researcher fill with their proposed thesis. Now, gap is nothing but the the area that the researcher addresses and fills. So what is missing or not addressed in the existing literature? So gap is something which is either missing or not addressed properly in the literature. Many other times the gap is not there actually. So in terms of the presence, so gap would have been addressed by somebody in some other country, but in your country that gap would not have been addressed. So there it becomes a spatial gap. Spatial gap means geographical gap. So in one particular geographical area that is addressed, in other area it is not addressed. In some of the cases, some of the elements of your framework would not have been used. Okay, or maybe your approach that you are using would be different. So I may take DFID sustainable livelihood approach, somebody else may take Oxfam livelihood approach. Basically they are different approaches, and my approach can be different from the other person's approach, but my approach would not have been used in the case of Indian context, and that is why I am using the sustainable DFID sustainable livelihood approach in the case of tourism. Now there can be also context wise gap. Context wise gap means the same study may be adopted in the case of agriculture, but in the case of tourism it may not have been addressed. So at that time it becomes a research gap that you can fill up. Finally, aim is not gap. So whatever is your research aim is not your gap. Okay, many of times people confuse research aims with the gap. Research objectives are not your gaps. Gaps are something which has not been addressed before, right? So it is not the aim, rather the gap. Okay. uh, then importance of research gap. Why should you write research gap, or why should there be a column or a paragraph called research gap in your thesis or in your paper? One of the most important things is that it prevents major revisions. Okay, so many a times many people send the research, but we as a researcher or we as a reviewer see that okay, so we find that this problem has been already addressed in some of the other researchers. So why this person is bothering with another paper? Okay, so if you do not provide your justification that what is your research gap, the reviewer might always ask for a major revisions. Okay, so and major revisions are something that is a horrendous exercise. So it is basically writing a paper in itself. Okay, so if in your paper there is major revision coming, then it means that you are getting ready for writing another paper itself. So to avoid those or to prevent those major revisions, you have to properly write that I meant to say that this is the gap that we are addressing. If you are not putting that gap, the reviewer may very well, confuse that gap with some of the other problems, and then he will ask you for major revisions. Make it publishable. So again, one of the major criteria of publication is telling that what is your research gap that you are addressing, because research is something which is dealing with the innovation also, or creativity or innovation or newness, novel topics. So those things are also there, and that is why for publishing some of the in some of the journals you need to properly mention the research gaps. Unique and original. So every research article should be, at least some way or the other, it should be unique and original. So if you are not writing down the research gap, then there is no way a reviewer can understand that what is the difference between this article and this article when the same approach has been used, same context has been used. So there should be something which is unique in your research, and you have to put it up on the paper. Deep knowledge of the topic. So finally, research gap actually acknowledges that the reader has gone deeper into the literature and found out that this aspect has not been covered in any of the research. So that gives the confidence to the author that I have gone deeper, and that gives the confidence to the reviewer that this person has read majority of the articles in the field of study. Then research gap identification is also consisting of lack of or insufficient studies conducted. What can be the sources? So lack of or insufficient studies conducted in that area. So basically you search it in the Google and you find out that not many of the studies focus on that same type of topic or focus on the same objectives. Suppose I say that in the livelihood studies, again women aspect has not been studied so much. So if you search through keywords, while you are searching through women empowerment as a keyword, you are finding that lesser number of papers have been published in that area. So insufficient studies or lack of studies, both of them are a sign that there is a research gap existing in them. One of the most important points you have to note down is that while you are writing a thesis, this is a shortcut method how you can find out the research gap. So directly go to the thesis that was published in the same area in which you are doing research and go directly to the conclusion section. So last section of your thesis, you will find the scope of further research. So that scope of further research becomes your research gap for the next research. So I am telling it like this, so I'll give you an example also. So if suppose you are doing research on, let's say, sustainable livelihoods, okay. So what you can do is you can go to Google Scholar, or for dissertation you can contact, I mean you can see in Google also, but for the sake of simplicity, you can go to Google Scholar. In case of Indian Scholar, we can go to Shodh Ganga also. Okay, so you can search through Shodh Ganga. So basically, if you are doing, let's say, research on sustainable livelihood, right? Sustainable livelihoods. So as I told you, Boolean algebra is sustainable livelihoods and tourism. And while you are searching for thesis, you always write dissertations. Okay, now dissertation, right? So you search it. Now you see that this is a dissertation that you will find, but which year it was? It was in 2002. So it is quite a old kind of dissertation. So we will search from 2021. Now you see that in 2021, you have to see that where are the dissertations, where are the theses. So if you find any thesis or if you find any good paper, you download the paper and see the scope of further research. Okay. So in every paper and every this one, there will be scope of further research. So you can go to the scope of further research, and there after downloading you can know that what is the research gap. In my thesis also, what I did is I also did a thorough read of the previous theses, and I found out that these are the, so there are Indian and there are foreign. So I found out that these are the theses that were published. Now this signifies that so suppose this is a thesis that I collected for sustainable livelihoods. One second, let's show it to you. So okay, meanwhile it is while it is opening. So this is a thesis that I found out that was published in the case of agroecology and sustainable rural livelihoods, interdisciplinary research. So sustainable livelihoods is there, and interdisciplinary research in South Pacific. Now this article was published in 2017. Now so this at the time when I was starting to write my thesis, or at the time when I was starting to doing research, this is the earliest thesis that I found out. So I directly went to the scope of further research, right? So so there will be definitely a section called scope of further research. So I can go to the scope of further research section, and I can find out that what is the research gap. So this is a shortcut to all research if you are writing a paper also, or if you are writing a thesis also. If you're writing a paper, you can go to the conclusion section of your research article. If you are writing a thesis, you can go to the scope of further research section of your thesis. Limitations of the previous research, this is also one of the areas where you will find out. So they will say that because the sample size was less, sorry, because there was no way or there was no funding, the sample size was less. Or maybe we could not take the perspective of women in some of the studies, then at that time this becomes your limitation, their limitation of research. So that can be your research gap also. Finally, conflicting theories. If there are, you find out that there is no such end to a debate, you can jump in and you can also put your research gap, that there is no end to the debate and that no end becomes your research gap. Okay. Other methodologies also. So suppose one of the authors have addressed the problem with some type of methodology, but he has not or she has not used another methodology. So you can say that that becomes a research gap that the author or yourself you are going to address. Now finally we are going towards the conceptual model, development. So first you have to know that what are these conceptual model and what are the key ingredients of this conceptual model. So as I said, we cannot discuss it in detail, but I'll give you a brief overview. So model is something in which you find variables. Okay, so there will be different type of variables which will constitute a model. Okay, generally speaking, there will be there will be two types of variable, which is the dependent variable and independent variable, right? But apart from the dependent and independent variable, if it is a complex model, so if it is a dependent independent model, then it will be a straightforward relationship from A to B. Okay, so A is the independent one and B is getting influenced by A, and that is why B becomes a dependent one. But not all conceptual models are basically simplistic model. So you have to visualize the relationship before you create the conceptual model. So you have to see that what causes what. So cause and effect relationship you have to visualize in your mind first. Or what you can do is take a pencil and start sketching that what from A to B, from B to C, from C to B, and within that which are the mediator and what are the moderator that you have to see. Now apart from the independent and dependent variable, we also see if it is a complex model, as I told, there will be something called as a mediator variable. And what is a mediator variable? Mediator variable is something that explains the cause and effect relationship. So suppose I say that hours of work hours of work before the exam and exam score has a relationship. So I am saying that hours of studies has a relationship with the test score. So the more the hour, the better the test score. So this is independent is hours of study and dependent is test score. Now, if I say mediator, so I will say that mediator is somebody which is in the middle. Okay. So in the marriage also we say that mediators, they are mediator. So they kind of explains the variable more. So what will I say? That the person who studies for more number of hours practices more number of math or more number of problems, and the more number of problems they practice, the better exams test score they get. Okay, so you can see that this variable is mediating means this variable is getting like mediating in between these independent and dependent variable. But moderator is something that does not mediates, rather than that influences. I will tell you how. So let's say again the same example, that hours of studies and test score. Now the general relationship is the more the person studies, the more number of hours the person studies, the better the test score they will get. But if I get one variable called moderator variable called IQ, so no matter how many hours a person studies, if the IQ is not better, then test score will not be good. In the earlier case, practices the number of problems it is practiced is a mediator, because through that this relationship is getting explained more. But moderator does not explain, rather it influences the relationship. Okay, so IQ influences the relationship. Finally, controlled variable is something that you don't want to study. So controlled variable, suppose in this all these examples, So in all these examples, these are the variables that you want to study. But if I say that health, okay, so health is something that I am not studying. So health of the student. So if the health of the student is not well, even though he or she has practiced for more number of hours, or he or she has practiced more number of problems, even then the test score will not be good. So moderator and control variables are almost the similar. Only thing, moderator variable is something that you are interested in studying. However, control variable is something that comes if you are not able to explain the model. Okay, so again, that is a very, it's a very brief overview. I think we have to go more into detail about that. But this is what this one, I mean, if you have to briefly say that moderator actually alters the relationship. As I told you, it influences the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, but it does not get affected by the independent variable. So in the case of my example, in which I told that, IQ does not get affected by the hours of study. So one person, however they study, if their IQ, so IQ is not something that changes with the hours of study. Their IQ does not go up. So whatever is your IQ remains the same. So that does not get affected. Okay. So moderator does not get affected. However, mediator gets affected, and it explains the relationship. So in my previous example, the now hours of study, influences the number of maths that you practice, and the number of maths that you practice influences the test score. So basically, mediator explains the relationship and gets affected by the independent variable. Finally, you have control variable, which is not relevant to your research question. This comes only when you are not able to explain your model through the existing moderator or mediator variables. Okay, so control variable will come in the later stages. But to give you one realistic point of view, this is something which is very superficial. So model development is itself, a long process to be done. Before I finish, I will show you how a conceptual framework looks like. So this is the conceptual framework that I had for my, thesis. So you can see this dotted lines. So these dotted lines tells that these are mediator variables. Okay. So I will explain it. It's very simple to explain also, because conceptual framework should be as simple as that. So it should be explained properly. So I am saying that every place has some context, condition, and trends. So this is about sustainable livelihood. So I am saying every place has some history, every place has some microeconomic things, every place has some political situation, economical situation, cultural, social, demographical situations. All these things affect the rural tourism capitals. Okay, livelihoods or livelihood resources, these are called the livelihood resources or capitals. In that you have human capital, economic capital, social capital, natural capital, and cultural capital. Now these cultural capital also affect the livelihood strategies and also get affected by the livelihood strategies. Okay, in that, this organizational structure, so what type of organizations are there? So vertical structure means top bottom or bottom up approach, or it is an horizontal structure, so whether all the people in the village work in the same level, or institutional process, whether governance of that place is good, or whether policies are better, or whether laws are better. So this is something that mediates. If it is better, then livelihood strategies will be much more strengthened. Okay, if it is worse, then livelihood strategies will be lessened, and again livelihood strategies will influence the capitals. Finally, depending on the livelihood strategy, your livelihood outcomes will come. Okay, so if you have a better strategy, then your livelihood, outcomes will be better. And again, livelihood outcomes will again influence the livelihood capital. So the better the outcome, the better the access to the capital that will happen. Now this is what it looks like on a picture format. When you are going to do it on a Excel sheet, you have to do it like this. So you can see here that this is how you have to make it properly. So you will have context, you will have the indicators. So every context is nothing but, every element is nothing but a abstract term. Okay, every element is an abstract term or construct. So we will discuss about the word construct again, because that is also very much difficult to explain in this one. But construct is something which is abstract idea. So and a construct is defined by the indicators, and indicators are defined by the queries. So basically history of the place. Okay, so now you can also see that regarding the history of the place there will be some question. Okay, so how did tourism evolve? So I am asking about the history, macroeconomic condition. What is the contribution of tourism to the local economy? So you can see here that the method that I am using, uh, I am using a secondary data and in-depth interview. So this is a qualitative inquiry that I am going to make. Where from I have got all these things? I have got these things from all these sources. So I have to cite all these sources. So similar to context and conditions, I will also have livelihood capitals. Okay, and I will also have organizational structure, livelihood strategies, and finally I will have livelihood outcomes. So all these things should be properly mentioned with the citations from where you are going to, where did you find it, and what are the scales that are going to use. So you can see that livelihood outcomes are going to be tested through the structured questionnaire survey. Okay, so all items will be questionnaire either in the yes or no format, yes, no, or can't say, or 5-point Likert scale. So this is how a conceptual model will lead you to a indicator framework. So this is what you have to clearly make before you start your research. So with that, I think I will end this presentation. I know it's not enough, but I have tried my best to explain whatever is possible in this period of time. Thank you so much, and we will discuss upon the next proceedings in further webinars. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty. Are there any questions from the participants for today's session? Are there
Sir,
any
I have
questions?
a question.
Yes, please.
Vasmati here.
Yes.
Sir, you were telling about the research gap and all that. So, for example, for a thesis, we find a research gap. And
Right.
after, thesis is for 5 years. And in between, when you are trying to update your review of literature in 2 years' time, you
Right.
find that that research gap has been addressed by another scholar. So what should we do at that time?
So you can put a note that actually I had started my research, because every research is actually a documented process. So the moment you finalize your research, you put a DC committee meeting. So once you are comfortable, or once you are knowing that okay, I am settled with my research gap, I am settling with this research gap. So you put a meeting before anyone else. You put a meeting, and once you put a meeting, there it is documented. So everybody in your DC committee member, including your guide, gives you permission that okay, this is the research gap that the candidate has found, and they also agree to it that that research gap exists. So by that, what you do is you kind of freeze your position in your research. Let other person also do that, but at the meantime you have also proofs that you have started much earlier. So that can be one of the ways how you keep a track of, and this problem will arise. So by the time I am writing my thesis, almost like 3 or 4 theses also were got published that addresses the same thing. Fortunately, I mean, none of the theses were from India, so that was one of the benefits things. But I kept all my things open, and I kept all my DC meetings in place. So this is how you use the DC meetings to your advantage, and keep a track of your research problems. Yes.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
To add on to the question asked by Mr. Vasumati, the likelihood of a similar conceptual model coming from a different researcher is very, very narrow. The way how you have synthesized
Yes.
the literature, how you have identified the research gap, how you evolve the conceptual model, the similarity of the thought may not be existing
That
at all.
rarely happens. Yeah.
Rarely
So
happens.
rarely happens.
Right. So, are there any other questions? One more questions we can take. All right. If there are no further questions, we will keep you posted about the next set of
Yes.
webinar
Yes.
shortly. The WhatsApp group will remain active. The intimation will be sent across the WhatsApp group. And also, like we'll try to send across in the email ID we have collected while
Yes.
receiving the registration form. I thank all the participants and Mr. Priyakrishna Moganty for taking the initiative to start this webinar series. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.